It happened the night I made rosemary chicken, lemon couscous, and that pie his mother always claimed nobody could make but her. 6 hours in the kitchen. My feet swollen. My hands raw from scrubbing the silverware. When I set the last dish down, she looked at the table and said with that syrupy voice, "You've got the hands of a good maid." They all laughed. My husband, too, didn't even glance my way. I stood there in silence, the serving spoon in my hand suddenly feeling like a chain. They thought I was just cleaning up after them. What they didn't know was that I'd already started packing, not just boxes, but proof. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of someone slowly reaching for the door. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. If you had met me before all this, before the apron, the cleaning buckets, the whispers, behind closed doors, you might have called me simple. Not stupid, not naive, just quiet. One of those women people assume is content just because she doesn't speak up. And maybe, for a while, I was. I grew up in a modest home on the edge of a sleepy town, where laundry flapped like flags of surrender, and silence was how we showed respect. My mother worked 2 jobs after my father died in a work accident when I was 9. She never remarried. Said one man was enough for a lifetime. Her love showed up in ironed shirts and warm stew, not hugs or long talks. From her, I learned how to fold pain neatly, tuck it under the mattress, and keep the house running. As a girl, I found comfort in patterns. I liked making the bed so tightly you could bounce a penny off the quilt. I liked the rhythmic satisfaction of dishes drying in rows. My teachers said I was dependable, a good listener. I think they meant I was quiet enough to forget unless they needed something. I didn't mind. I liked being useful. That felt like love to me. When I met David, I was 27. It was at a local community dinner for flood relief volunteers. I was handing out plastic plates, and he was cracking jokes while stacking. Chairs like they weighed nothing. He noticed I organised the donation table by size and expiration date. "You've got a brain for order," he said. "I need that in my chaos." He smiled like he'd never known a peaceful day in his life, and something about that made me feel chosen, like maybe my steadiness had value after all. David was warm in a way that overwhelmed me. He was the loudest in a room, always the one to bring up a story that had everyone laughing. But with me, at first, he was gentle. He said I calmed him, that I felt like home. He brought me wildflowers and told me I reminded him of a poem he'd once read but couldn't remember the name of. I told myself I didn't need a poem, I had his attention. When he introduced me to his family, they were everything mine wasn't. Loud, sarcastic, always interrupting each other, always gathering, in someone's too small living room with too much food and too little listening. I felt like an outsider in a language I hadn't been taught. His mother hugged me with one arm and said, "Oh, you're the girl who cooks." His brother raised an eyebrow and added, "Hope you're not as serious as you look." I smiled. I always smiled. That's what I was taught. Be gracious, be good, and they'll come to love you. In our first apartment, things were better. I made dinners, and he made me laugh. I wrote little notes and left them in his coat pocket. We stayed up late watching crime shows, arguing over who did it. He'd fall asleep with his hand on my knee, like he was afraid I'd vanish. I thought, this is it. This is love. Just 2 people making a life out of small gestures and leftovers. We got married in the spring. Nothing fancy. A courthouse. A lunch afterward with too many relatives I barely knew. I wore a soft blue dress and held daisies. He said I looked like a sky he wanted to live under. I held that line in my heart for years, like a pressed flower I couldn't let wilt. After marriage, things changed. Not all at once, but slowly, like how wallpaper peels from the corners long before you notice the whole wall's coming. Undone. His family became more involved. First, it was his mother staying with us after surgery, then his younger brother, between jobs. Then cousins visiting just for a few weeks that turned into months. Each time, David said, "It's just how we are. We show up for each other." And I believed that. I wanted to believe that love meant sacrifice, that family meant folding chairs and extra blankets and extra patience, so I gave up my home office to make space. I let go of my Sunday afternoon walks so I could prep meals. I laughed when they teased me for labelling the fridge shelves or keeping the spice rack. Alphabetized. I told myself I was building a life that required compromise. I stopped painting. There was no space, no time. I boxed up my brushes and easel and told myself I'd come back to it when things calmed down. They never did. The more I gave, the more they took. Not just space, but tone. They began speaking about me in the room, like I was an appliance. "She keeps this place together," someone would say, and no one ever asked if I was okay. David changed too. He stopped noticing things. Not in a cruel way, but in that slow, familiar way people grow used to the glow of a light and forget it's still burning. He kissed me less, said thank you less, spent more time out of the house. Meetings, drinks, tired. Always something. And me. I kept folding towels. I kept setting dinner. I kept answering questions no one truly asked, because I didn't know how to stop, because being needed had once felt like being loved, but need, without care, is just labour, and love without noticing is just quiet erasure. I thought love meant folding myself into the corners of their chaos, until they forgot I was ever whole. I didn't notice how heavy it all became because I carried it in pieces, one extra plate, one more towel, another person moving in, just for a few weeks that turned into a season, then a year. It started with David's mother recovering from her knee replacement. "A month," she said. I rearranged the guest room, bought chamomile tea, printed a list of her medications and taped it to the fridge. She said I was so organised, like it was a compliment, but her tone had that undertow, the kind that carries you somewhere you didn't intend to go. Then came his younger brother, Trevor. Lost his job in Phoenix, showed up with 2 duffel bags and a guitar he never played. "He just needs time to get back on his feet," David said. I gave up my quiet mornings, rearranged the pantry and cooked meals that stretched further. No one asked. It just happened. Next came 2 cousins from out of town. "Family emergency," David said. I nodded. I always nodded. I cooked for 6. I cleaned for 7. I listened for no one. At first I kept my calendar, the little whiteboard by the fridge with everyone's schedules, notes, appointments. But the more people filled the house, the more my writing disappeared, covered by takeout receipts and doodles and reminders that weren't mine. Eventually, I stopped using it. Like I stopped using my yoga mat. Like I stopped putting on lipstick. In the mornings, the house became a body with too many mouths and no ears, and I was its spine. Always bending, always upright, always ignored. I spent most of my days managing everything nobody noticed, refilling toilet paper, rewashing towels, replacing light bulbs. I fixed the garbage disposal once using a YouTube video, because Trevor dropped a beer cap in it and didn't say a word. When I asked if anyone else could clean the bathroom, David said, "You do it best. You have your little system." Like that was a prize. It wasn't just the work. It was how invisible it made me. They'd walk past me in the hallway like I was a fixture, like a lamp or a coat rack. Conversations happened around me, never with me. When I did speak, suggesting gently that maybe someone else cooked dinner one night, there were chuckles and glances. "You love cooking," someone would say. "You're so good at it." What they meant was, "We're used to you doing this. Don't change the script now." And David. He stopped seeing me too. I mean, he looked at me, said "love you" in passing, kissed my forehead when I handed him his coffee. But it felt like watching someone water a plant they no longer admire. Habit, not affection. He didn't see the way I sat at the dinner table without eating, or how I stood in the laundry room for 20 minutes just to be alone. He didn't ask why I stopped humming when I cleaned, why my side of the closet remained untouched for months, and me. I made excuses for all of them. They were stressed, they were tired, they didn't mean it, they'd come around, they'd notice. Eventually. What a lonely kind of faith that is, waiting to be noticed. Every week I wrote the grocery list, knowing I'd pay for half of what others devoured. I started recording the budget, marking who consumed what, not out of pettiness. But to stay sane, I took pictures of messes, catalogued the damage. Not because I planned anything then, but because I felt like I was disappearing. And I needed proof I had been there at all. Sometimes I'd find myself watching old videos of myself. A birthday where I was laughing with cake on my chin. Beach trip where my hair blew wild and David kissed me like I was everything. I'd sit with those images like artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed, because the woman in those videos was gone. And the one left behind was just trying to keep the house from collapsing. The worst part? I kept smiling. At dinners, I smiled. At parties, I smiled. At church, when someone said, "You're such a blessing to that family," I smiled so hard. It hurt my jaw. No one saw the quiet ache behind it. One night, David told a story at a dinner party. A funny one, about how he used to be messy until this one whipped me into shape, pointing at me with a laugh. Everyone chuckled, and then his cousin, drunk on red wine and arrogance, added, "Yeah, who needs a cleaning service when—" "You've got her!" They all laughed. My husband too, a full belly laugh, and I smiled. But inside, something cracked. Not a loud break, just a quiet fissure, like ice beginning to thaw underfoot. It wasn't that I hated cleaning or cooking or caregiving. I had been doing that my whole life. I knew how to care. But love, I realised, is only real when it's returned, when it's seen, when it's honoured. And this? This wasn't love. This was duty weaponised. This was my kindness being mined like... It was endless. I began to write in a notebook I kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies. Lists of what I did, what I paid, what I endured. Not for revenge. Not yet. But for remembrance. I needed to remember what I had lost. Because I had a feeling no one else would. I wasn't in a marriage. I was in uniform. Just one they didn't have to pay for. It was a Tuesday. One of those washed-out days where the sky looks like it forgot how to be blue. I was in the kitchen, organising the spice rack for the 3rd time that month. It had become a habit, a ritual I did when I needed to feel like I was still in control of something. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there she was, Lena, my old college roommate, holding a coffee carrier and a half smile. We hadn't seen each other in over 7 years. She'd moved to Oregon, started a non-profit. The last time we spoke, she'd been planning a trip to Peru. I'd been planning a grocery run. "I was in town," she said, stepping inside with the confidence of someone who had never needed permission. "Thought I'd surprise you." And she did. Not because she showed up, but because when she looked, at me, really looked, her smile faltered, just slightly, just enough. "This house is huge," she said, glancing around. "Is all this yours?" I opened my mouth, hesitated. "Ours," I said, then added, "Mostly his family's now." She nodded slowly. "You look... tired." I offered her a mug. I didn't have anything fancy, so I poured her coffee into one of the chipped ceramic cups with a fading sunflower on it. She held it gently, like it might shatter. Maybe she knew I felt the same. She asked about my job. I told her I wasn't working, about my art. I said I hadn't painted in a while. She glanced toward a closed door. "That your studio?" I shook my head. "Storage room now." She didn't say much after that, just sipped her coffee and looked at me like I was someone she used to know but couldn't quite find in the room anymore. Before she left, she hugged me, tighter than necessary, and whispered, "You used to laugh so loud you'd choke on your tea." I tried to laugh then, just to prove her wrong. But the sound came out hollow, like knocking on a wall you already know is empty behind it. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my reflection in the glass of the oven door. Hair tied back, apron dusted in flour, shoulders curled in like punctuation. I looked like the background character in my own story. That night, I asked David if we could take a weekend for ourselves, just the two of us. Go somewhere quiet, just be together. He didn't even look up from his phone. Can't. Trevor's job interview is this weekend and Mum's been dizzy again. I nodded. Of course. Always someone else. Maybe next month, he added, eyes still scrolling. You know how things are? Yes. I knew exactly how things were. They never stopped being this way. Later that evening, I was folding laundry when I found a sock that wasn't ours. Bright red with cartoon hot dogs on it. I stared at it for a long time. Silly, maybe, but it was like a flare went off. A loud, ridiculous, undeniable reminder that my home wasn't mine anymore. That I was folding strangers' clothes without question. I tucked the sock into my apron pocket and didn't say a word. From that day on, I started noticing everything. Every conversation I wasn't part of. Every dish left for me to clean. Every assumption that I'd remember everyone's schedules and preferences and bills. I started tallying hours I spent doing invisible labour, hours they spent ignoring me. I kept the red sock in my apron like a keepsake, a symbol of the exact moment I realised I didn't live in a home. I operated a service. That week I sat alone on the edge of the bed and looked around our room. His cologne bottle was knocked over. A half-empty water glass sat on my nightstand. My books were untouched, gathering dust. The small photo frame on my dresser, a snapshot from our honeymoon, tilted slightly to the left. I hadn't straightened it in months. I used to be the kind of woman who made sure every frame was perfectly aligned. Now, I didn't even notice. When they started leaning, that's when I pulled down the suitcase from the top of the closet, not to leave, not yet, just to feel the weight of it in my hands, just to remember what it felt like to choose movement. I opened it, placed it on the bed and stared. I didn't put anything inside, but I left it open. For the next few days I moved differently, slower, quieter. I stopped answering questions that weren't truly questions. I let the silence grow a little thicker. When someone asked, "What's for dinner?" I replied, "I haven't decided." Not coldly, just neutrally. And the look of confusion I got, like I'd spoken in another language, told me everything I needed to know. No one noticed the red sock in my pocket. No one asked about Lena's visit. No one asked about me, but I started asking myself things I hadn't asked in years. What do you want? Who are you when no one needs anything from you? And the hardest question of all, what would happen if you stopped? The numbers didn't lie. I wasn't a wife. I was a full-time ghost with benefits. It's strange how pain doesn't always come, in loud crashes or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives like dust, soft, constant, settling over everything until you can't breathe without coughing. The slights were small at first, casual, slippery. David's mother started correcting me. In the kitchen, "You really should rinse the rice 3 times, not just twice." Trevor would leave his shoes by the door, every day, in the exact spot I'd asked him not to. Aunt Liz once handed me her empty teacup, mid-conversation, without even breaking eye contact with whoever she was talking to, and each time I said nothing. I swallowed it, smiled. That's what I was taught. Grace under pressure, dignity in silence. A good woman endures. But there's a kind of erosion that happens when you're not seen. A hollowing out. One afternoon I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, not just the face, but the posture. Head down, shoulders turned in. My own body was apologising for taking up space. That night, during dinner, someone cracked a joke about family roles. "David's the provider," his cousin laughed, "and she's the domestic goddess." Another chimed in, "More like domestic help." Laughter exploded around the table. I smiled. I always did. But inside, something scraped. Later, I found a trail of pasta sauce smeared on the stove, fingerprints on the fridge, and a pile of dirty dishes in the sink. When I asked who left it, they looked at me like I'd asked who set the sun. "Relax," Trevor muttered. "You're so uptight." Lately, I didn't respond. I just picked up the sponge. But something shifted. I started keeping a private list. a journal I tucked into a box labelled Winter Scarves. On each page I wrote down the small ways they dismissed me. She likes cleaning. She's not. A real guest? She lives here. She's just private, not much of a talker. She's always around, don't worry about it. Ask her. She remembers everything. Each phrase, a pinprick. Each sentence, a slow bleed. What they didn't realise is that love dies in micro-abandonments. One day we were planning a family photo. A big group shot. Something to send out with Christmas cards. I stood quietly while everyone debated outfits and locations. Then Trevor, half drunk and grinning, said, "Hey, what if she wears a maid uniform? You know, as a joke?" They laughed. David laughed. And I stood there holding a tray of lemonade, wondering if they even saw the person behind the picture. That night I went to bed early. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and traced the cracks with my eyes, memorising them like constellations. My body felt heavy, but not from fatigue, from carrying too much that no one offered to help unload. A few days later, I found something. I was cleaning our nightstand drawers, mostly just habit by then, and there, tucked between old greeting, cards and expired lotion, was a small velvet box. I'd seen it before, but I'd never opened it. It had belonged to David's late step-grandmother, given to me when we married. She said, "Keep it safe. You'll know when it's time." Back then, I'd smiled politely and tucked it away. Now, hands trembling, I opened it. Inside was a delicate gold locket and a folded slip of paper. The locket was tarnished, but still beautiful, etched with the image of a single open door. The paper had just one line in spidery handwriting. "Freedom never announces itself, it waits." I didn't know what it meant then, not fully, but I knew it wasn't about jewellery. I placed the box back in the drawer, but this time on top. Week later, I offered a new dinner recipe, something light, something fresh. His mother frowned and said, "You're getting too creative lately. Just make what people like." David nodded. "She's right. Let's not make it weird." I looked down at my hands. They weren't trembling. They weren't clenched. They were still. And that scared me more than anything. Because stillness, in a woman like me, was not peace. It was prelude. After that, I began to change things. Quietly. I stopped asking what others wanted for breakfast. I just made eggs, the way I liked them. I stopped waiting to see if someone would offer to clean. I left the dishes. I sat outside in the evenings with my tea and didn't respond when someone called from the kitchen. They noticed, but they didn't say anything. Not directly. Passive comments. Whispered confusion. David even joked once. "You're turning into a little rebel, huh?" I just smiled. Or maybe I'm just done playing house. He looked at me, puzzled, but I didn't explain. I didn't owe him one. They still saw me as the maid, the organiser, the caretaker, but they hadn't realised Maid's clean, and I had started collecting evidence, receipts, paperwork, photographs of damage, screenshots of conversations, a quiet map out of the life they built on my back, and I knew now this wasn't just exhaustion, it was awakening. Every joke left a bruise, invisible, but tender. Until one day I stopped laughing. The night it happened, I remember the smell first. Rosemary, garlic, browned butter, drifting through the hall like a false promise. I'd spent all day cooking, not because I wanted to, because it was Trevor's birthday, and someone had said, "You don't mind, right? You're the only one who knows how to make it nice." So I made it nice. The table was set, napkins folded like little birds, candles lit, the ones I was told were too expensive to burn, but tonight I burned them anyway. I wore my softest sweater, the one David once said made me look like someone from a novel. My hands were raw from scrubbing, but I didn't care. I needed this to go right, one last time. They arrived loud, already half laughing, arms full of takeout containers someone had brought just in case. Someone played music on their phone. The table was barely noticed. No one complimented. The meal. No one asked how long I'd been on my feet. Plates clinked, chairs scraped, and I stood at the edge of it all like an exhibit no one paused to read. And then it happened. His mother looked up mid-chew and said, "You've got the hands of a good maid." Laughter. Not cruel, not overt, just thoughtless, familiar. David laughed, not loudly but enough to crack me open, and still I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked into the kitchen, set the serving spoon down slowly, untied, my apron. Folded it carefully, not in defeat, but in ritual. That's when it hit me. Not like a slap, but like a slow, rising tide. I dropped to the floor. Not because I was weak. Because my body had finally decided it would no longer carry what my mouth refused to say. My back against the cabinets, legs folded, arms limp. My eyes stayed dry, but I couldn't move. I sat there in the dark, listening to laughter in the other room, and something old, something buried, rose to the surface. A memory. I was 8 years old. My father had just died and my mother was scrubbing the floor. Hard. Too hard. Her knees were red. I asked why she was cleaning when everything hurt so much. She looked up, eyes wet but wild, and said, "This world doesn't give us breaks, baby girl. It gives us buckets." Then she handed me a rag. That night came rushing back to me now, and for the first time I understood. My mother hadn't been strong. She'd been surviving, same as me, passing the bucket down like an heirloom, but I didn't want it anymore. Eventually I stood up, slowly, quietly. I went to the bedroom, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. Not crying, not raging, just still, and in that stillness, I saw everything clearly. I opened the drawer. The velvet box with the locket sat on top now, waiting. I ran my thumb along its edges but didn't open it this time. I didn't need to. I already knew what freedom smelled like now. It smelled like rosemary and burnt candles and the echo of laughter that didn't include me. David came in later. He sat on the bed, took off his shoes, checked his phone. "You okay?" he asked. Absently, not even glancing up. I looked at him and thought, "You don't even know what you've lost." But I didn't say that. I said, "I think I'm going to visit Lena soon." He blinked. "Lena? From college?" "Yes." "That's random," he muttered. "What about everyone here?" "Everyone, not me. Everyone." I nodded like I understood. But inside, something clicked into place. The kind of click you hear when a door, long jammed, finally gives way. Engagement prompt 2. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace? Or worse, stayed silent so long you forgot your own voice? Let me know below. That night, after he fell asleep, I pulled the suitcase from the closet and began filling it. Not with clothes. Not yet. But with things no one else thought to look at. Tax returns, medical receipts, notes, screenshots, copies, proof. I wasn't planning to run. I was planning to end it well. But first I needed to get clear. I needed to feel the silence of certainty. That night, I walked to the backyard. It was cool out, stars bleeding into the sky like forgotten promises. I sat in the chair, no one else. Used. The one tucked behind the garden hose. The one where I used to drink tea and imagine I mattered, and for the first time in years, I let myself sit there without thinking of anyone else. Just me. Just breath. And in that still, lonely, terrifying moment, I chose myself. Not loudly, not dramatically, just finally. I didn't scream. I just stood up and folded the apron. Not out of defeat, but preparation. After the laughter faded that night, after the dishes clattered and the front door finally shut behind Trevor's girlfriend's fake goodbye, I didn't return to the kitchen. I didn't scrape plates or wipe crumbs or scrub the pan. No one thanked me for using. I didn't do anything, and no one noticed. That was the beginning of the silence, not just around me, within me. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from restraint, like a dam holding back water that should have been released years ago. In the days that followed, I stopped initiating. I didn't ask if anyone needed anything. I didn't remind David of appointments. I didn't refill the coffee. I simply withdrew. And the world kept turning. David barely flinched. He started picking up more takeout. His mother microwaved leftovers and made passive comments about how I must be under the weather. No one asked what changed. No one noticed that I hadn't smiled in 3 days. I started walking alone in the early mornings, just 30 minutes before the house woke up. I didn't wear earbuds. I listened to the birds. I let my breath match the rhythm of my feet on the pavement. For those 30 minutes I belonged to no one, not even him. Back at the house I moved like smoke, in and out, barely touching anything. I started gathering what I needed slowly, strategically. I transferred money into a separate account. I changed the password to my email. I scanned documents while everyone watched TV. They'd laugh at something on screen, and I'd be in the corner uploading my life to a drive called Exit. One afternoon, I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom and listened to them all in the kitchen. Someone had spilled something. I heard Trevor say, "Where's the maid when you need her?" More laughter. David didn't correct him. He never did. I stared at the wall for a long time. Not angry, not even hurt anymore, just done. That evening I sat at the edge of our unmade bed and pulled out the notebook I had hidden in my scarf box. I began listing everything I had done that day, not to remember but to confirm. Paid electric bill, cleaned bathroom floor, called insurance for David's appointment. Washed Mom's laundry, made breakfast. No one ate it. Deleted the anniversary reminder. On David's phone then, without even thinking, I flipped to the last page and wrote in shaky ink, "This was never a home. It was a job I didn't apply for." After writing that, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a rusted hinge finally. Creaked open. That night I had a dream. I was standing at the bottom of the ocean, fully clothed. Around me were all the things I had ever lost, my old sketchbook, my diploma, a photograph of my mother brushing my hair. Everything floated just out of reach, and above, the surface shimmered, distant, quiet. I didn't swim toward it. I just watched it, knowing I couldn't stay down there much longer. When I woke up, my eyes were wet, and I didn't even remember crying. That day, I told David I was taking a weekend away. Just me. He looked confused. "What for?" "Clarity," I said. He shrugged. "You sure everything's okay?" I just smiled. Not yes, not no, just a shape of a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Before I left, I did something strange. I opened my jewellery box and took out an old charm bracelet from college, cheap, chipped, barely held together by a rusted clasp. It had been a gift from Lena. One of the charms was a tiny silver chair. I stared at it and remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. We were 21. Finals week. I had studied for 14 straight hours. I was exhausted, scared, doubting everything. Lena dragged me out to a coffee shop and said, "You sit, you breathe, you don't earn rest, you just take it." Then she pointed at the chair and said, "This is your throne. Don't let anyone make it a folding chair." I slipped the bracelet on my wrist and went to the cabin I had quietly rented a few towns over. It was nothing fancy, a twin bed, a kitchenette, a rocking chair on the porch. But for the first time in years, every surface inside that space was mine. I made coffee the way I liked it. Strong, no sugar. I read an entire book in one sitting. I listened to the silence, not as punishment, but as permission. I let go. No one called. No one came looking, and that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. Have you ever remembered something small? Just when everything felt like it was falling apart. When I returned home 2 days later, no one asked where I'd been. The trash was full, the sink overflowed. Someone had used my lavender candle and left the lid off. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I walked upstairs, changed my shirt and opened my laptop. The file named Exit waited for me. I opened it, and I kept going. I didn't yell. I organised. and that terrified them more than fury ever could. Silence didn't break the house. It exposed it. I returned from that quiet weekend changed in ways I couldn't fully explain. Not fiercer, not louder, just rooted. Like the wind could hit me and I wouldn't move. Because now I knew. I knew who I was without their noise. I knew what I would never return to. I began sorting through files with a calm I didn't recognise in myself. Tax documents, mortgage records, bank statements. Not because I planned to burn the bridge. Because I planned to walk away without tripping, and that's when I found it. It started with a paper-clipped packet tucked in the back of the filing cabinet, one I didn't remember ever signing. The deed to the house, the one David and I bought together 5 years earlier, but now only his name was on it. Mine was missing. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a copy error. It wasn't. There was a signature, David's, a notarized amendment, dated over a year ago. The document had quietly removed me from any legal ownership. I read it 3 times, then I read it again. When David got home that evening, I didn't confront him right away. I waited. I set the table, heated leftovers, said, nothing. Let him sit in his familiar spot, unaware that the air had shifted. Halfway through dinner, I said, "Did you ever refile the deed for the house?" He looked up, surprised. "What?" "Yeah, a while back, just some tax advice." "Why?" "Just wondering." He shrugged, forked more rice. "Don't worry. It's all taken care of." That was the moment I realised how easy it had become for him to lie. I washed the dishes afterward, slowly, dried my hands on the towel, then walked upstairs, opened my drawer, and took out the velvet box. This time, I opened it not to wonder, but to decide. The locket still held its soft weight. The folded note inside bore that same sentence: "Freedom never announces itself, it waits." And beneath the note, something I'd never noticed before, was a smaller folded document. Shaking, I opened it. It was a land deed, a tiny patch of land 3 hours north, left to me, years ago, by David's grandmother, the one who'd handed me the velvet box on my wedding day with a strange look I didn't understand at the time. A gift. Quiet. Legal. Unclaimed, but still mine. I sat there for a long time, clutching the paper, letting the irony settle in my chest like warm cement. While David and his family had erased me from their house, someone else, long gone, had left me my own ground to stand on. And then, I did something I hadn't done in months. I laughed. Not loudly, not wildly, just enough. The next morning, I didn't speak. I made coffee, packed a small box, placed it in the centre of the living room. Inside it were copies of the house documents, the notarised deed, and a printout of the land title in my name. David was in the kitchen, scrolling his phone. His mother muttered something about the dryer being broken again. I said nothing. I walked to the centre of the room, set the box down, gently, deliberately, then turned, walked to the front door, and left. No one stopped me. No one asked. No one followed. Not a single word, just the sound of a box, quietly, profoundly, being noticed too late. Later that day, David called. 4 times. I didn't answer. He texted, "What is this? Where are you? Why would you do something so dramatic?" I didn't respond, because it wasn't drama, it was documentation. When I finally picked up, his voice was angry, high-pitched. "This is ridiculous. Why didn't you just talk to me?" "I did," I said. "You just didn't listen." There was a pause. I imagined him standing in the same kitchen where I used to keep the bills sorted, the calendar updated, the groceries organised. I imagined him staring at that box like it might explode. "You left," he said, as if that was the crime. "No," I replied. "You removed me. I just made it official. That evening I went to the land, 3 hours north. Nothing but dry grass and trees and sky. No house, no fences. Just soil, untouched and wholly mine. I stood in the middle of it as the wind pushed through my hair and thought, this is what it feels like to not owe anyone anything. I didn't know what I'd build there. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But at least now I had a place to build, a place to plant something that belonged to no one but me. They tried to erase me. But she'd already given me something they couldn't touch, a seed buried in silence. You don't start over all at once. You do it the way trees do, by shedding. I didn't make any big announcement. There was no social media post, no grand I'm free declaration. Just quiet movement, like a tide going out before anyone notices the water is gone. I rented a small cabin on the edge of a lake, not much more than 4 walls and a bed, but it had wide windows that let the morning in and a porch where I could sit and listen to the trees. I didn't bring much, just 1 suitcase, a coffee mug I liked, my old charm bracelet and the box with the locket. Everything else I left behind. I told David the divorce papers would come soon. He didn't believe me at first. Said, you just need time. But time had never been the issue. What I needed was space. And now I had it. The first morning in the cabin, I woke before sunrise and made myself breakfast. Eggs, toast, no commentary. No one hovering behind me. No one asking if I made enough for everyone. I sat at the little table with the chipped blue paint and ate in silence, watching steam rise from my coffee, and for the first time in years the silence felt like mine, not a punishment, a perimeter. I walked every morning down a dirt path to the lake. The wind carried no voices. Only the sound of water brushing the shore and the faint rustle of leaves, a conversation without words. One afternoon I went into town and saw a help wanted sign at a small cafe, a tiny place with 3 tables and an espresso machine older than I was. I walked in and introduced myself to the owner, a woman named Marla with laugh lines and tired eyes. She looked me over once, nodded and said, "You any good with eggs and patience?" I smiled. That's all I've ever known. I started working there the next morning, part-time. Nothing fancy, just honest work. Work I chose. Each customer had a name. Each coffee I made felt like a small act of dignity, not because I was being used, but because I was finally visible. The locals warmed to me. A man named Glenn brought his dog, Dottie, and always left $2 extra in the tip jar. A woman, named Ruth, complimented my handwriting on the chalkboard menu. No one asked about my past. No one cared what I used to be to someone else. I began sketching again, too. Just rough drawings at first, a tree limb, a pair of hands, an open door. My wrist ached from disuse. But slowly, my lines grew surer. I found an old sketch pad at the thrift store and filled its first 5 pages in a single weekend. At night, I lit candles and read. I started with poetry, then novels, then old letters from my mother I hadn't looked at in years. In one, she wrote, "I hope you never confuse keeping things tidy with keeping people pleased. You deserve a room of your own, not just a room you cleaned." I read that line 3 times, tears slipping down without permission. She knew. Even then. She'd handed me a bucket, yes, but she'd also whispered freedom into my pockets. I just hadn't reached for it yet. David called, left voicemails, texted things like, "This isn't what I wanted. You're being cold. We had a life. Come home." But he never said, "I'm sorry." He never said, "I saw what I did." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I had finally learned that replies are a kind of currency. And I wasn't spending any more of mine on someone who bankrupted my spirit. One day, I walked into the cafe early and found a box on the back counter, wrapped in craft paper and tied with twine. There was a note. "You looked like someone who used to love art. If I'm wrong, forgive me." Inside was a set of professional paintbrushes. Soft, fine, new. No name on the card. Just the kind of kindness that doesn't ask for applause. I held those brushes like a sacred thing, and that night I painted, For 5 hours. My hands moved without my mind. The first painting was of a woman seated in a wooden chair, looking out a window. The window was cracked open, and the breeze lifted her hair just slightly. I titled it Still. I posted a photo of it online. No caption, just the image. It was liked, shared, passed around. Someone messaged me asking if it was for sale. I said no. That one was for me. I painted another. And another. Soon I was showing them in the cafe, just 1 or 2 on the walls. Customers started asking. One woman wept in front of the one I named Quiet Exit. She touched my hand and said, "This feels like me." I nodded. It was me too. I didn't leave out of spite. I left because I finally saw a door and walked through it. Word travels in families like spilled wine, quick to stain, slow to disappear. David's mother was the first to reach out. Not to apologise, just to ask if I still had the antique gravy boat she'd loaned me for Thanksgiving 3 years ago. She said, "If you're not using it anymore, I'd like it back." I didn't reply. Then came the cousin with the loud laugh, and louder judgments. She left a voicemail that started with, "Hey girl," and ended with, "So like, what really happened between you and David? Like we were friends." Like I owed her a footnote in my undoing. I didn't reply to her either. Even Trevor, bless his aimless heart, sent a text. "I always thought you were solid. Never figured you'd walk out like that." No one asked how I was. They asked about things, objects, items, missing conveniences. Not about the woman who used to make the coffee they never tasted. David tried a different route. He posted a photo of us on Facebook, a wedding photo, the one where I was laughing and he was kissing my cheek. The caption read, "She was the calm in my chaos, still figuring it all out." Sympathy rolled in. Comments, heart emojis, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Someone even sent me a screenshot asking, "Are you okay? It looks like he's hurting." Hurting. That word clanged inside me like a dropped pan, because he was hurting now, not when I sat at the table every night waiting for him to look up from his phone. Not when I cleaned up after his mother's bridge club and wasn't even offered leftovers. Not when I asked for a weekend alone and was told, "We can't just abandon family." Now he was hurting, because I had finally left. Grief only counts when it's loud, apparently, when it's performed. Mine had been silent, so it didn't register. But I was grieving, every day. Not for him, for the version of me that thought. Love was service. I let them talk, let them tell their side. Meanwhile, I lived. I painted another piece called Folding Chair. It was just a chair in the middle of an empty room, sunlight streaking across it. The same chair from the charm bracelet Lena gave me, the one she said was my throne. A woman from the next town over bought it. She said, "I don't know why, but..." I look at this and feel strong. I nodded. "Then you do know why." At the cafe, Marla offered me more hours. I said yes, not because I needed the money, but because I liked the way it felt to be asked, not assumed, to be valued, not expected. One afternoon, she asked if I could help host a small art night, a few women, a few easels, a few glasses of wine. I agreed. And that Friday, 5 women gathered in the back room with their canvases and their questions. Most hadn't held a brush since high school. I told them, "You don't need to be good. You just need to show up." And they did. Nervous, messy, brave. Ruth, the older woman who always wore scarves even in summer, painted a field of sunflowers. Said she hadn't done anything just for herself in 20 years. I helped her clean her brushes and she whispered, "I don't know who you were before this, but I'm glad you found your way here." So was I. Every time I stepped outside my cabin, every morning I woke up without that sinking weight of performance, I remembered something new about myself. I remembered I like black coffee and Cello sweets and letting my hair air dry. I remembered how it feels to laugh with my whole mouth open. I remembered what silence really is. Not punishment, but permission. I donated most of the things from the old house to a women's shelter in the next county. Furniture, kitchenware, blankets, all boxed and labelled. I signed the release forms anonymously. Let them use what I had been buried under. Let. It shelter someone else. A week later, David sent one final message. It just said, "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." I read it twice, then deleted it, because I already had. I wasn't broken. I was quietly whole. Not healed, not finished, but standing on both feet in my own life. One morning, I looked out at the land left to me and began sketching where the studio might go. Just a single-room space with a wide front window and a wood stove for winter. Nothing extravagant, just mine. And in that moment, it hit me. They thought I'd come crawling back. They thought I'd regret it. They thought I'd dissolve without their chaos. But I didn't disappear. I returned. To myself. To my breath. To the version of me that existed long before anyone handed me a dish towel and said, "You're just so good at this." They thought I'd vanish. Instead, I reappeared. Not where they looked, but where I belonged. It had been 3 months since I left when I heard the knock on the cabin door. Not a text, not a call. A knock, the old-fashioned kind, full of assumption and nerves. I stood, at the window holding my mug, watching him through the thin white curtain. David. Same stance. Same jacket, same uncertain face. He knocked again, this time softer, like maybe if he gentled his hands he could rewrite history. I opened the door. "Hey," he said. I said nothing. He looked past me, into the warm glow of the small room. The hanging string lights, the canvases stacked in the corner, the scent of something fresh baking. His eyes landed on a half-finished painting on the easel. A woman in profile, her eyes closed, head tilted toward the light. "This is you?" he asked, almost like a whisper. "Yes." He nodded, swallowing something he didn't know how to say. I stepped aside, wordlessly, and let him in. Not as a guest, as a visitor to a life he no longer belonged to. He sat down at the small table, looked around, trying to assemble meaning from silence. "I thought you'd be staying with Lena or something," he said, like that might soften. "The edges." "I needed my own space," I replied. He took that in. "You really painted all these?" I nodded. He let out a breath. "You were always good. I should have noticed." I sat across from him, not because I wanted conversation, but because I wanted completion. We weren't done until I heard the hollow echo of the truth hit the floor between us. "I didn't come to fight," he said, "or beg. I just—" He paused. "I don't understand how you could just leave." I leaned forward, my voice calm. "Steady. You didn't hear me leave because you never listened while I was there." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You removed me from the deed," I continued. "Without telling me." He stiffened. "It wasn't personal. It was financial. My mum said—" I held up a hand. "No," I said. "You don't get to use her voice anymore. You signed it. You filed it. You made the decision." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't think it mattered. You were never going anywhere. There it was, the rot at the centre. You thought I'd stay," I said. "Yeah," he whispered. I stood and walked to the shelf where I kept a small wooden box, not the velvet one, but a plain pine box I had carved a tiny crescent moon into. I opened it and pulled out the final papers. "Here," I said, placing them gently in front of him. "This is the divorce agreement. It's fair. My lawyer reviewed everything." He stared at them like they might burn him. "I don't hate you," I said. "I'm not here to punish you, but I'm not coming back." "You don't miss it?" "Us?" he asked too quickly. I looked at him for a long time before answering. "I miss the idea of us," I said. "The version I carried around when I didn't. No better." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I used to find endearing. Now it just looked like avoidance. "I didn't know I was hurting you," he said. "I believe that," I replied. "That's what makes it worse." He looked up sharply. So what? That's it? You're just done? No, I said. I'm finally beginning. He stood then, pushing the chair back with a scrape. I just wanted to see if you were okay. I am, I said. He nodded slowly. You seem different. I am. The silence between us was no longer heavy, just still, like the pause between chapters. He looked around one last time. You built a whole life here. I didn't think you'd be able to. That made me smile, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed so much. You never saw what I could carry, I said, only what I could clean. He opened the door, stepped out into the fading light, and then, just before leaving, he turned and said, You used to be so gentle. I looked him dead in the eye. No, I said. I used to be silent. He left after that, got into his car, drove away. No dramatic scene, no storming off. Just the quiet hum of an engine and the finality of someone who finally understood he wasn't the centre of the story anymore. I stood on the porch for a while after he disappeared down the gravel road. The sky was lavender and gold, the kind of colour you only get when you're really looking. I went back inside, lit a candle, sat in my chair. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just breathed. Deeply, fully. And then I did what he never could. I cleaned up after myself, not because I had to, but because I wanted my space to stay sacred. He looked at the box like it was filled with grief. I looked at it like it was freedom. The days after David left were quiet, not the aching kind of quiet, but the kind that fills a space with breath. The kind that makes you hear your own footsteps again. I folded the divorce papers and placed them in a stamped envelope. It was done. A week later, my lawyer called. They tried to challenge your storage access, she said. I blinked. The storage unit? Yes. Apparently David's family claims some of the items inside were theirs. Furniture, heirlooms, a few electronics. I laughed. Not out of amusement, out of that dry, low disbelief that follows you when people mistake your grace for forgetfulness. The lease is in your name, she continued. They have no legal right. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Thank you, I said calmly. That afternoon, I drove to the unit, opened the sliding door, stared at the boxes I had packed not in anger, but in preparation. Each one labelled, accounted for. Everything in it something I'd once cleaned, repaired, or carried without thanks. I made a decision right there. The next morning, I called the women's shelter one town over. I have some items to donate, I said. Household goods, linens, small furniture. The woman on the phone sounded surprised. That would be incredible. I delivered every box by hand, signed the release anonymously, walked away without looking back, let them feel the empty space, let it echo. Later that week, Marla at the cafe pulled me aside after my shift. A woman came in asking about your paintings, she said. Said she saw one on someone's Instagram. Wants to talk about commissioning something. I blinked. Me? Yes, you, she said, smiling. People feel something when they look at your work. That's not common. That night, I sat in front of my newest piece, unfinished. A woman sitting on a porch, face tilted toward the moon. I hadn't named it yet, but it felt close, familiar. I was brushing in the stars when the letter arrived, handwritten, no return address, just my name on the envelope, my full name. The bye. One I stopped using because no one ever said it right. Inside, a note written in blue ink on plain paper. I used to resent you. You made everything look so easy, so put together, while I was falling apart quietly. I'm sorry for the jokes, the jabs, the silence. We laughed at you because we didn't know how to be better. But I saw you. I always saw you. We all did. We just couldn't admit it. You leaving. It cracked something in all of us. And maybe that's what needed to happen. It wasn't signed. But I knew the handwriting. David's cousin. The same one who once handed me her teacup like I was a waitress. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it under the terracotta pot on my windowsill. Let it live there in the soil of my healing to break down like compost, something once toxic, now nourishing my growth. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That same evening, I received a message from a woman I hadn't seen in over a decade, someone I went to high school with. She'd found me through the cafe's art show, said she bought one of my prints. "Your work, it made me cry in public, but the good kind. Thank you for painting women like us." I replied simply, "Thank you for seeing her." The next week, I hosted another art night at the cafe. 12 women showed up, all different ages, all different kinds of tired. I didn't teach technique. I just gave them space, brushes, blank canvas, wine. One of them, Ruth, painted a pair of hands opening a window. She whispered, "I haven't painted in 30 years. I forgot what it felt like to take up space." I smiled and said, "You never stop deserving it." Later, I finally named the painting I'd been working on. Moonlight Doesn't Ask Permission. It sold within 2 days. Every time I mailed off one of my paintings, I included a note inside the packaging. This work was born from silence. May. It hang in a place where your voice is never ignored. I wasn't famous. I wasn't wealthy. But I was free. And freedom, true freedom, has a texture. It feels like coffee you made for yourself. Curtains you picked. A radio playing your favourite song while no one talks over it. It feels like a room where you decide what stays and what goes. It feels like your own name, spoken fully, even if it's just in your own head. And for the first time, that was enough. Reversed perception twist. Complete. A once dismissive antagonist reveals guilt and insecurity, offering a subtle shift in audience empathy. But our narrator maintains quiet dignity and distance. They buried me in silence, not knowing I was a seed. Some people think freedom is a storm. A door slammed, tires screeching, words yelled down hallways. Mine wasn't. Mine was a slow morning, the smell of coffee, bare feet on cold wood floors, a quiet hum on the radio, no one demanding, no one watching, just me. Whole. Undisguised. The funny thing is, when you finally reclaim your life, there's no victory parade, no music swells, no triumphant anthem plays. It's quieter than that, more sacred. It's a woman folding laundry and realising all the clothes are hers. It's the absence of apology in the mirror. It's painting with the windows open because no one minds the smell. I hadn't spoken to David in months, not since the papers were finalised, not since he said I was cold, and I told him that warmth without truth is just manipulation in a prettier coat. Sometimes I'd hear updates from people who hadn't yet learned I was done explaining myself. He moved in with his mother again. They're renting out the basement now. Things aren't going great. I never asked for details, because the truth is I wasn't curious, not anymore. Revenge, I learned, is noisy. It wants witnesses. But dignity sits in silence and lets the dust settle. I didn't want to make him suffer. I wanted to stop suffering myself, and I had. I built my life from the baseboards up. My own studio now stood where that patch of land used to be. It wasn't grand, just one room, high windows, a wood stove, and a shelf filled with paints I bought with money I earned. Every time I stepped inside, I whispered, "This was never theirs to take." The locals began calling it the Quiet House. Not because it was sombre, but because something about it made them feel listened to, and that was the true miracle. I had become someone others felt safe with, not because I was agreeable, but because I was real. I taught art, yes, but what I really taught was attention, presence, the sacredness of slow. Women would come in, uncertain, shaking off decades of being told their desires were too loud or too strange or too late. They'd paint, they'd cry, they'd laugh with their mouths wide open, and sometimes they'd just sit, finally unhurried. One of my students, a woman in her 70s, told me, I feel like I've been running errands my whole life. This is the first place I've arrived at. I understood that so deeply, I had to excuse myself. In the early evenings, I'd sit on the porch and watch the shadows grow long across the grass. I never needed to lock my door, not because bad things couldn't happen, but because my soul was no longer breakable. I'd light the little candle my mother once gave me and reread the note from David's cousin, now wrinkled under the terracotta pot, not for closure, just to remember how far I'd come, and I'd whisper a line I now lived by. They thought I was just cleaning up after them, but I was clearing space for myself. That phrase, that memory, echoed through me like a bell, because it was never about being right. It was about being free, free from proving, free from pleasing, free from wearing a smile like armour. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you believe quiet dignity is stronger than revenge? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts below. One night, I painted a piece called The ID Stillest Victory. Just a table, 2 empty chairs, a folded apron on one of them. In the corner, a cracked window letting in golden light. It sold within hours. The woman who bought it said, "I don't know why, but this makes me want to stop apologising." I smiled and said, "Then it's working." Because that was the real win. Not his regret, not their silence, not even the studio or the art, or the land. The real win was waking up and knowing I never had to disappear again just to keep the peace. They thought I was just cleaning up after them, but I was clearing space for myself. Sometimes I sit on the porch of the quiet house and count the birds, not because I need to know how many, but because I once lived a life where I never noticed them at all. I was too busy washing dishes, folding towels, tending to needs that were never mine. Now I wake with the sun and drink my coffee without hurrying. I read letters from strangers who saw my art in towns I've never visited. I keep a worn notebook, filled with names, women who've cried in front of my canvases and told me, "That's me, that's how it feels." I don't counsel them, I don't give advice, I just listen, and sometimes that's more than anyone has ever done for them. I'm not angry anymore. Anger was part of it, yes, it got me moving. But it wasn't what healed me. What healed me was the absence of noise, the ability to hear my own voice again after years of everyone else's drowning it out. There's a kind of resurrection that doesn't involve fire or applause. Just a woman who learns how to return to herself. I used to think love was quiet suffering, that being good meant being small, that serving others meant shrinking until I barely existed. But now I know. You can give without disappearing. You can care without collapsing. You can hold space without hollowing yourself to do it, and when someone only values you for the way you soften their world, but not the way you brighten your own, that's not love. That's convenience. I've had to forgive myself for staying so long, for folding that apron one too many times, for staying silent when I should have spoken, for mistaking endurance for virtue. But I know why I did. I was raised by a woman who taught me strength through silence. Who handed me buckets when she had no hands left to hold her own? She did her best with what she knew, and I honoured her, until I learned how to honour myself. And now I build. Slowly. Steadily. A woman once asked me if I missed my old life. If I ever looked back, I told her this: I don't miss it, I just remember it. The way you remember a house you escaped from. Grateful you survived, but with no plans to revisit. David is a distant name now, like someone I met on a layover. Someone who taught me a brutal kind of lesson, that even soft people can be taken for granite. And his family? They don't contact me anymore. The silence between us isn't bitter. It's boundary. Sometimes silence isn't absence. It's protection. I still keep the velvet box. Still open it from time to time and run my thumb over the locket etched with the open door, not because I need a reminder, but because it feels like a full circle. The land his grandmother left me, the quiet little patch of earth that saved me, has become more than soil. It's the foundation of my return. I built more than a bee studio on it. I built myself, and I learned that freedom isn't just a place. It's a posture. You stand taller when no one is pressing down on your shoulders. You breathe deeper when the air isn't filtered through someone else's needs. You smile without flinching when no one expects you to smile for them. I used to be the woman behind the broom. Now I am the woman holding the brush, and I no longer use it to clean up after others. I use it to colour in the outlines of the life I was always meant to live. This story didn't begin with betrayal. It began with a question I was too afraid to ask. What would happen if I stopped? And now, years later, I can answer it without doubt. I would rise, not like a phoenix from fire, but like a woman from silence. Sure, steady, whole. Turns out, I wasn't just the woman behind the broom, I was the one building the exit. Started. In the hook. They thought I was just cleaning up after them. Ended in reflection. I was the one building the exit. Quiet dignity, revenge, self-restoration, moral closure.